I reported my own son's car as stolen while I was still standing on the hospital steps, staring at the ICU where his wife was fighting for her life. And the hardest part, it wasn't even the phone call. It was the way he lied to me calmly while he drove past that hospital laughing, music shaking the windows. 2 young women in the backseat like it was a Saturday night joyride. My name is Me, and this is a story about what happens when a mother finally stops mistaking love for loyalty. Let me take you back to where it all started. Greetings, dear friends. Before I open the doors to my life and share this difficult story with you, I want to ask for a small favor. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps stories like this be heard. And drop a comment letting me know which state or city you're listening from. It would warm my heart to know how far my voice has traveled. Now get comfortable. Happy listening. I used to believe I was the kind of mother who did it right, and not perfect, Lord no. I made my share of mistakes like anybody else. But I was steady. I was responsible. I was the kind of woman who always had 2 cans of soup in the pantry, extra blankets folded in the closet, and a little envelope tucked in my purse with emergency cash, just in case the world acted like the world. I raised my son, Sterling, mostly by myself. His father, God rest him, wasn't a bad man, just a tired man, a man who carried his own disappointments so heavily he didn't have much room left to carry a family. And when he passed, Sterling was still young enough to need guidance, but old enough to feel angry at the universe. So I became everything. I became the one who packed lunches, attended parent, teacher nights, worked overtime, and still made sure there was a hot meal and a clean shirt the next morning. I built my life like a brick wall, one careful, sturdy decision at a time, and Sterling was my soft spot. He had my eyes, my dimples, my laugh when he was in a good mood. He also had a way of turning his charm on like a lamp when he wanted something. And I'd be lying if I told you I didn't enjoy being needed. A mother's heart is a tricky thing, honey. It doesn't just beat, it bargains. Sterling grew up into a handsome man, tall, broad, shouldered, a smile that could melt the tension out of a room. He wasn't stupid, he had talent. He could talk his way into a job, into a deal, into a discount, into a second chance. But somewhere along the line, he started believing his charm was the same thing as character. Looking back, I should have noticed the small signs. Like how he'd borrow money and never bring it up again unless I did, or how every job he got somehow had crazy people at it. Unfair bosses, jealous coworkers, or how he always needed the newest thing, the nicer thing, the flashier thing, like his life depended on looking like he had already arrived. But I ignored it because mothers do. We tell ourselves he's just finding his way. We say he's young, even when he's not that young anymore. Then Sterling met Vada. Oh, Vada, that girl had a gentleness about her that made you want to sit up straighter in her presence. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't fill the room with her ego. She filled it with warmth. She worked at a library, then quiet job, steady paycheck, soft hands, the kind of woman who still wrote thank you notes and who remembered the names of people's children, the kind of woman you trust without knowing why. Sterling brought her home for Thanksgiving. She showed up with a homemade pie and flowers for me. Not store-bought, real flowers still damp from the cold outside. She smiled shy, like she wasn't sure she belonged in our family yet. I remember thinking, oh thank God. Because to me, she felt like balance, like a steady anchor tied to a man who was always floating toward the nearest attention. When they got married, I didn't hold back. I paid for their condo, historic brick building, high ceilings, safe neighborhood. I told myself I was investing in their future, giving them the start I never had. And then, 3 years later, I bought Sterling a car. A big midnight blue SUV, safe, luxurious, the kind you put car seats in someday. He hugged me so hard my glasses tilted. "Mama," he said, voice thick with gratitude. "You always come through for me." I remember feeling proud. I remember thinking, *maybe love really can fix things. I didn't know I was feeding a problem. It started with a feeling. Not a call, not a text, not a piece of evidence, just a feeling. A cold knot beneath my ribs that wouldn't let me sleep. You know how it is when you reach a certain age. You don't need proof anymore. You just know when something isn't right. The body whispers what the mind refuses to accept. For 3 days I called Sterling. Ring, 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 no answer. I called Vada. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At first I told myself they're busy. Then I told myself their phones are on silent. Then I told myself the lie every mother tells when she senses danger, but wants to believe she still has control. They'll call me back. But that 4th night, I sat on the edge of my bed in my little Chicago apartment and stared at the ceiling, and I realized my hands were cold. Not from the weather, from fear. So I did something I never do. I acted without permission. I bought a ticket for the next flight down to that southern city where they lived. I didn't tell Sterling. I didn't announce myself. I just packed a tote bag with 2 jars of homemade elderberry preserves, Sterling's favorite since childhood, and a little plush teddy bear I'd bought on impulse. Foolish, maybe, but something in me wanted to bring comfort, something soft, something that said, even if the world is hard, you're not alone. At the airport, everything smelled like roasted coffee and busy lives. People were laughing, rushing to reunions, hugging at gates like the world hadn't already broken their hearts. But I didn't feel joy. I felt the weight of other people's expectations, like the universe had handed me a suitcase full of dread and told me not to drop it. When I landed, the southern air wrapped around me like a damp blanket, humid, heavy, thick with heat even though it wasn't summer. I got into an Uber and watched the city pass by, palm trees and billboards and long stretches of highway. I kept checking my phone, silent. When we pulled up to the condo building I'd bought, it looked just like I remembered, strong, respectable, proud. Brick and iron, a courtyard with tidy bushes, the kind of place that looked like nothing bad could happen inside. But the elevator ride felt too long, and when I stepped onto the 3rd floor, my stomach dropped. Their door was ajar. Not wide open, just not closed, like someone had left in a hurry. I pushed it gently, and it creaked as I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not home smells, not cinnamon, not laundry detergent, not anything warm. It smelled like stale tobacco and sour alcohol, and something else too, something sad, like old food left too long. Like neglect, boots were scattered in the hallway, one upright, one kicked over, scuffing the cream wallpaper. I moved deeper into the apartment like I was afraid of waking something. The kitchen table looked like a disaster had been living there. Unwashed dishes, dried pizza crusts, empty bottles of expensive liquor, and then mail, bills, unopened envelopes stacked like accusations. My hands trembled as I touched them, because Sterling always bragged about how he was handling things. I turned toward the counter and saw a small medication box. Heart drops, blood pressure pills, prescribed to Vada months ago, still sealed, dust on top like it had been sitting there untouched for weeks. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Oh, baby," and then, behind me, a voice, "Who are you looking for?" I spun around so fast my tote bag swung off my shoulder. A neighbor stood in the doorway, elderly woman, faded housecoat, hair wrapped up like she'd been resting. But the look on her face wasn't anger, it was pity. "I'm Sterling's mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her mouth tightened. "Oh, honey, I don't know where your Sterling is. Out running the streets, I reckon." My heart slammed against my ribs. "And Vada?" I asked. The woman sighed like she'd been holding that information in her chest for days. "Ambulance took her. 2, maybe 3 days ago." My vision blurred. "Took her where?" "City General," she said. They carried her out on a stretcher, thin as a shadow. I was about to call the police myself, the way this door was sitting open. I didn't even say thank you. I just backed out of the apartment like the walls were closing in. I don't remember pressing the elevator button. I don't remember the ride down. All I remember is the word in my head: hospital. City General Hospital's emergency room smelled like bleach and trouble. People sat slumped in chairs. A man held a bloodied towel to his head. A woman rocked back and forth whispering prayers. I walked straight to the front desk like I had a right to interrupt the whole building. "I need ICU admissions," I said. The receptionist frowned. "Ma'am, my daughter-in-law," I said, forcing the words through my throat. "Vada Jefferson." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Then she nodded toward a hallway. "IQ, 3rd floor." My legs felt like they were walking through water. The ICU was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a place where the air was holding its breath. A nurse tried to stop me. "Ma'am, visiting hours, I'm family," I said. She looked at my face and something in her expression softened. Like she could see I wasn't there to cause trouble. I was there because trouble had already arrived. She called a doctor. He came out, tall man, tired eyes, glasses in his hand. "Are you me, Vance?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Dr. Dubois," he said. "Your daughter-in-law is very ill." "How?" My voice cracked. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Bilateral pneumonia, advanced severe dehydration, malnutrition. Fever has likely been high for days without treatment." My ears rang. She's married. I whispered more to myself than to him. "Her husband, my son." The doctor's eyes held mine. "We have no record of any husband being here," he said quietly. No emergency contact answered. She came in essentially alone. I felt my hands go numb. "Can I see her?" He nodded briefly. And when I stepped into that ICU room, oh, dear friends, I will never forget what I saw. Vada was on a bed that looked too big for her, tubes everywhere, machines humming. A ventilator breathing for her because her body was too tired to do it alone. Her face looked like it had been carved down to bone. Cheekbones sharp, lips dry, skin pale like paper. She didn't look like a woman who caught a bad cold. She looked like someone who had been left. I stood there and couldn't breathe. And then I backed out of the room, because if I stayed, I might have screamed until the whole hospital shook. I walked out to the hospital steps. The evening air hit my face like a slap. Cars rushed by like the world had no idea my family was falling apart. And that's when I saw it. A midnight, blue SUV came roaring around the corner, music blasting so loud the bass rattled the hospital windows. The very SUV I had bought for Sterling. The windows were down. Sterling was behind the wheel, laughing. Head thrown back like life was a party, and in the car with him, 2 young women, shrieking, hair flying, waving their arms like teenagers. Sterling didn't even look toward the building, didn't glance at the ICU, didn't slow down. He just drove past like his wife wasn't upstairs fighting for breath. I stood there frozen. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Sterling. "Hey Ma, can't talk. I'm at the hospital with Vada right now. It's really serious. I haven't left her side. Pray for us." I stared at that text until the words blurred, not from tears, from fury so cold it felt like glass in my veins. Because I had just seen him, and he had just lied. Not my heart, not my spirit, my patience, the cord that had been holding my mother. Love in place finally frayed and broke. I didn't call him back. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in the parking lot, because screaming is what people do when they still believe the other person might care. I knew he didn't, so I walked back into that hospital lobby, sat down, and drank a cup of warm water that tasted like plastic. And I made a decision that would change everything. I have lived long enough to know something about anger. There's the kind of anger that makes you loud, messy, reckless. And then there's the kind of anger that makes you quiet. Strategic. That second kind is the one that scares people because it doesn't burn out fast. It stays hot underneath the surface, steady like a stove left on low. That's what rose up in me on that hospital chair. I pulled out my phone and I remembered something I'd insisted on when I bought that SUV. I registered it in my name. Sterling had pouted when I did it. "Mama," he'd said, smiling like he was hurt, "don't you trust me?" I'd laughed it off. Told him insurance was cheaper that way. Told him it was paperwork, nothing more. But that night, that paperwork became my protection. Because on paper, that SUV did not belong to Sterling. It belonged to me, meaning he drove it only because I allowed him to. And that allowance ended the second I watched him fly past his dying wife with girls in the backseat. So I dialed 911. My voice was calm, too calm. 911, what is your emergency? I'd like to report a stolen vehicle, I said. They asked my name. I gave it. They asked the make, model, plate number. I gave it. They asked where I last saw it. I told them the street, the direction, and I added something that wasn't even a lie. It was an educated guess. I suspect the driver is under the influence, I said. He's driving aggressively. There are passengers. They may be in danger. I hung up. My hand didn't shake, because by then I wasn't acting like a mother. I was acting like a guardian. Vada needed one. Sterling had proven he wasn't it. Then I called my old friend Odura. Odura was the kind of attorney who didn't waste time pretending the world was fair. She dealt in facts and paperwork and consequences. She answered on the second ring. "Me, you all right?" "No," I said. "I need documents drafted tonight." "What kind?" "A deed for the condo, transferring to Sterling," she asked automatically. I stared at the ICU doors. "No," I said to Vada. Silence. Odura knew what that meant. "Ooh, me," she said softly. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure," I replied, and then I added, "and I need a power of attorney drawn up too. General, I want control to protect her if she can't." Odura exhaled. "Be at my office at 8, she said. "I'll have it ready." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there in that hospital lobby and listened to the building hum. People walked by in scrubs, a janitor pushed a mop bucket, and behind those ICU doors my daughter-in-law was still alone. I went back up to Vada's room, held her hand, talked to her, not about Sterling. I didn't want his name to touch her spirit. I told her about Chicago, about the way the leaves turn gold, about how elderberry preserves can heal you from the inside out. I whispered, "You are not alone anymore. Do you hear me, baby girl? Not anymore." Hours passed, then my phone rang. A local number. I answered, a man's voice, official. "Ma'am, this is Officer Bradshaw. We've detained a vehicle matching your description. The driver claims he is your son and that you gave him permission." In the background, I heard Sterling shouting, "Mama, tell them it's my car." Officer Bradshaw asked, "Is the driver authorized to operate your vehicle?" I closed my eyes. I saw Vada's face, tubes, pale skin, machine breathing for her. I opened my eyes and I said no. The officer paused. "Ma'am, you're confirming it's stolen." "Yes," I replied. "I don't know who that man is. My son is in this hospital right now, in the ICU, beside his wife." I could hear the officer processing that. "I understand," he said. "We will proceed accordingly." When I ended the call, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief, because for the first time in years, I was no longer protecting Sterling from consequences. I was protecting someone else from Sterling. But what I didn't know was that Sterling's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial, it was calculated, and it had been going on longer than I could bear to admit. The next morning, I left the hospital for the first time. Just long enough to go back to the condo to find Vada's identification and personal information. The hospital needed certain forms to adjust paperwork. She had no one else. The apartment felt even colder in the morning. Light came through the windows, showing every mess in sharp detail. Every bottle, every dish, every sign that someone had been living like a child while a grown woman quietly disappeared. I went into their bedroom. The closet looked uneven. One side was full of Sterling's clothes, dress shirts, shoes lined up, cologne on the dresser. The other side, Vada's side, looked smaller, like she'd been shrinking in that space long before she ended up in the ICU. I opened drawers looking for her ID. That's when I found it. A small diary, worn cover, not fancy. Just something private. I hesitated, because even in my anger, I still had respect for boundaries. But then I thought of Vada unconscious in a hospital bed, and I realized her privacy had already been violated by neglect. By lies, so I opened it, and honey, that diary was not gossip. It was a record of suffering. March 12th, Sterling asked for money again. I gave him the last $400 I saved for the dentist. I flipped the page. April 20th, he screamed, said the apartment is his, said his mother gave it to him, and they just let me stay. My hands went cold. I turned another page. May 5th, he sold my grandma's ring, said he lost it, but I saw the pawn receipt. My throat tightened so hard I had to sit down. I felt the shame creep in because I had funded the stage where this cruelty played out. I had bought the condo. Sterling had used that truth like a weapon, twisting it into a lie to control her. And then I found the part that made my stomach turn. A note about heat. He turned off the heat again, said it's expensive. I'm sick, but he says I'm dramatic. I'm so cold. I closed the diary and held it to my chest like it weighed 100 pounds. This wasn't just a man being selfish. This was a man draining his wife, money, dignity, health, like she was a resource he could spend. And then it hit me. The medication box in the kitchen, the dust, the sealed package. He hadn't even bothered to make sure she had her heart medicine. He hadn't bothered to make sure she ate. He hadn't bothered to make sure she stayed alive. I stood up, put that diary into my tote bag, and left the apartment with my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Back at the hospital, I sat beside Vada again. Her skin was warm, feverish. I rubbed lotion into her hands because they were dry and cracked. I whispered, I saw it, I know it all, and I promise you, you are not alone. That afternoon, Vada stirred. It wasn't much, just a twitch of her fingers, but it was life. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy like curtains. And when she finally looked at me, her eyes were foggy with fear. Her mouth moved under the mask. I leaned close. She whispered, don't let him in. A shiver crawled over my skin. Who, baby? I asked softly. Her eyes widened with panic. Sterling, she breathed. A tear rolled down her temple. He turned off the heat. I was so cold. Don't let him in. The monitor beeped faster. A nurse rushed in. They sedated her again to calm her heart rate, and I stood there watching them work, feeling something in me settle. Not rage, not panic, judgment, because now I knew with absolute certainty. Sterling was not just irresponsible. He was dangerous. The next morning, I went straight to Odora's office. I hadn't slept more than a handful of minutes at a time. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, my coat wrinkled, my eyes felt like sandpaper. Odora looked at me and said, you look like you've been through war. I have, I answered. Let's sign. She slid a folder across the desk. Deed transfer, power of attorney, everything clean, everything legal. But before I signed, Odora held up another thin folder. Me, she said carefully. I found something else while I was pulling the title abstract. What? I asked. Odora opened the folder and slid a copy of documents toward me. My signature was on them, almost, but not quite. A week ago, she said, Sterling submitted a loan application. Paid a lender, very shady. He tried to use the condo as collateral. My stomach clenched. But he can't, I said. It's in my name. He doesn't have authority. Odora nodded grimly. He submitted a power of attorney, allegedly from you. I stared. Then I noticed the detail, the tail on the M. Too long, too careless, a forgery. My voice came out flat. He forged my signature. Odora nodded again. Yes. For a moment, I could only hear the blood in my ears. The betrayal wasn't new. It was deep, planned. My own son had been preparing to mortgage my property behind my back. And if he couldn't pay, men with hard faces and harder hands would have come knocking, not at Sterling. At me, at Vada. Sterling had been gambling with everyone's safety. I picked up the pen, and I signed everything. Not with shaking hands, with certainty. When I finished, Odora stamped the paperwork and said, "I'll file electronically. It'll be processed within the hour." Then I said, "I also need to update my will." Odora's eyebrows lifted. I looked her dead in the eye. "He will inherit nothing." I said, "Nothing." Odora didn't argue. She just nodded and did her job. When I left her office, I made one more call. To the dealership. "Alex," I said, voice steady. "The SUV I purchased is at police impound. I authorize you to retrieve it. Tow truck." "Yes, ma'am," he said quickly. "Then sell it." I said. There was a pause. "Sell it. It's brand new." "I don't care," I replied. "Sell it today and do not send the money to me. Send it to City General's Charity Fund, under Vada Jefferson's care." Alex stammered, "Of course, ma'am." I ended the call. Then I stood outside for a moment, the morning sun warming my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power, not cruel power, protective power, the kind a mother is supposed to use when her child becomes a threat to others. Sterling called from jail over and over. Voicemails, "Mama, answer your phone. This is insane. You need to come down here and fix this." Not once did he ask, "How's Vada?" Not once did he say, "Is she okay?" Not once did he say, "I'm sorry." 2 days later, I got a text. "They released me. I'm coming home." "We need to talk." I stared at that message. He said home, like it belonged to him, like he hadn't turned it into a cold, neglected cage for his wife. I went to the hospital lobby and sat across. From the elevators, I waited, and when those elevator doors opened, there he was. Sterling looked rough, wrinkled shirt, hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes, limping like his pride had been bruised the same way his body had, but even then he walked like he expected the world to bend back into place. He spotted me, marched over, and barked, finally. "Mama, what did you do? They had me locked up with criminals." I slowly closed the book in my lap, looked up at him, and I said, "Hello, Sterling." "You smell. Go wash yourself before you raise your voice at me." His face twisted. "Are you serious right now?" "You reported my car stolen. Our car." I corrected softly, "My car." He scoffed, "Where are the keys?" "I need to go." I stared at him, and I said the words that shifted the ground under his feet. "The car is sold." His mouth fell open. "What?" "It was retrieved from impound and sold." I repeated calmly, "The money went to your wife's medical care." His eyes went wild. "You had no right." "On paper, I had every right," I said. Then he lifted his chin like he still believed he had control. "I'm going to Vada." He snapped, "She'll straighten you out." He pushed toward the ICU doors. And that's when my hired security guard stepped in front of him. Big man, stone face, professional. Sterling stopped short. "Move." He demanded. The guard said, "Unauthorized visitors are not allowed." Sterling's voice rose. "That's my wife." From behind me, a nurse looked up sharply. I stood and said quietly, "Remove him." Sterling whipped around. "Mama." I looked him in the eyes, and I said, "You are not going in there to finish what your neglect started." The guard pushed Sterling back into the hallway, not violently, firmly, with authority. Sterling stumbled, humiliated, and then his face changed. His anger melted into that familiar performance, the one that used to soften me. He swallowed hard, and in a trembling voice he said, "Mama, please, I'm sorry, I got confused. I have problems." I didn't respond, so he dropped to his knees, right there in the hospital corridor, hands clutching my coat like I was still his lifeline. "Mama," he sobbed, "forgive me." "I'll fix it. I owe money, serious money. They'll kill me, please." "I'm your son." He looked up at me with wet eyes, and for one flicker of a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who once ran to me with scraped knees, the one who once whispered, "Mama, I'll take care of you when you're old." And then I remembered Vada's whisper, "Don't let him in." So I said, "Stand up." He shook his head. Not until you forgive me. I leaned closer and I said so calmly it sounded like prayer. Sterling, I forgive you for being my son. But I will never again protect you from what you've chosen to become. His sobbing stopped. His face hardened. I pulled a stamped copy of the deed from my bag and held it up. The condo belongs to
Vada, I said, as of this morning.
Solely, he stared like he couldn't read. Then he whispered, but if he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I saw the thought in his eyes, asterisk if she dies, I get it back. Asterisk so I answered the thought he didn't speak. Don't count on inheritance, I said, not from her. Not from me. I pulled out my updated will. He read the highlighted portion aloud, voice cracking. All property and accounts bequeathed to Hope for Pa's animal shelter. He looked up, horrified. Cats, he choked. You're leaving everything to cats. I said, cats don't freeze sick women in winter. His jaw clenched, I'll contest it. I nodded, try. He spat, you're a monster. I replied, no, Sterling. I'm the mother you needed years ago. You just didn't like her. Then I said, security will escort you out. His eyes flashed with hatred. This isn't over. He hissed, backing away, and I watched him run down the hall like a man chased by his own choices. Sterling didn't go to a friend's house. He didn't go to rehab. He didn't go to the library to research jobs. He ran to the condo, because in his mind, property meant power. And power was the only thing he understood, but he was too late. Odora had already arranged for locksmiths, police supervision, and the paperwork. When Sterling arrived, sweating and furious, door was open, but not for him. Workers were drilling out the lock. Police officers stood by. Odora stood there in a crisp suit like she was guarding a courthouse. Sterling shouted, get out. This is my home. Odora didn't raise her voice. Your mother gifted this property to Miss Vada Jefferson. She said, you have no legal claim. Sterling tried calling friends. One hung up. Another didn't answer. Because the kind of friends Sterling kept were loyal only to whatever he could provide. Without the SUV, without the condo, without my money, he was nothing to them. Then Odora handed him 2 trash bags and a gym bag. His entire life packed up like he was a renter who didn't pay. Your clothes are there, she told him. The laptop stays. It's in Vada's name. Sterling stared at those bags like he couldn't understand that he had been reduced to laundry. And when he finally left, cursing and shaking, the new lock clicked behind him. That sound, Odora told me later, felt like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. Sterling went outside, dragged his bags to an ATM, tried using the supplemental card linked to my account, but I had already frozen it. The machine swallowed it, and there Sterling sat on dirty concrete with his whole life in trash bags and no one to call, because the same mother he expected to rescue him had finally stopped. Vada lived. That's the part people always hold their breath for when I tell this story. She lived. Her recovery was slow. There were weeks of therapy, breathing, exercises, doctor visits, follow-ups, but she came back to herself piece by piece. And the first time she could sit up without shaking, she looked at me, eyes clear, and whispered, "Why are you here?" I squeezed her hand, and I said, "Because you didn't deserve to be alone." She cried then, not loud, just tears that slid down like grief leaving the body. Months later, that apartment looked different. Fresh paint, clean air, no stale smoke, no bottles on the table. Vada returned to library work, this time with boundaries like steel. And I moved nearby, not inside her space, not controlling, just close enough that if she ever whispered, "Don't let him in," again, someone would hear her. We became family, not by blood, but by survival. And Sterling, 6 months after everything, I saw him at a car wash, thin, bent, scrubbing someone else's luxury vehicle with red hands and tired eyes. He looked at me like he wanted to speak, but I didn't stop. I didn't glare. I didn't gloat. I just looked through him the way you look at a stranger on the street, because the Sterling I raised, he was gone, and the man who remained had to live with what he had done. Later that day, message came from an unknown number. "Ma, please, I'm hungry." Even $10. I stared at it for a long time. Then I blocked the number, deleted the thread, and I went home with cinnamon buns for Vada. So that is my story, dear friends, a story about how love can blind you and how truth can set you free, even when it breaks your heart first. People will ask me, was it cruel to cut off your only son? And I always answer the same way. It is not love to protect someone while they destroy others. It is not mercy to keep feeding a grown man's selfishness while a good woman starves beside him. Sometimes the most motherly thing you can do is to stop enabling what is evil, especially when it wears your child's face. If you're listening tonight and you're carrying guilt because you finally set a boundary with someone you love, let me tell you something as gently as I can. Boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear what city or state you're listening from and what you would have done in my place. Until next time, remember, every story has a lesson, and yours might be just beginning. With love and respect, me.